Walter Cronkite once said, in seeking the truth, you have to get both sides of the story. Coming to you live from the impact area of information and the destination of deliberate discussion. Welcome to Depth of Perspective, where the truth has no bias. With your host, Alex Kirsch. Information is our weapon, and we aim it on the azimuth of fire towards a better future for our country. Prepare yourselves for the arrival.
What's going on, everybody? Alex here. Hopefully everybody is having a great weekend so far. I thought I would actually take the time to do a quick video because Depth of Perspective is now officially going to start becoming like a rant page. Anytime I feel like there's something I need to talk about or bring certain awareness to, that's what Depth of Perspective is going to be all about. I'm going to continue to put products out like on Spreaker, and every now and then I'll push out a video every now and then. So the reason why I actually wanted to do a video today is because I actually started checking out a couple articles, and some of these articles I felt were a little disturbing. Okay, so if anybody's curious, okay, I'm very open about who I do support, who I don't support, and I haven't really done a whole lot of just talking about it on Facebook. But the thing is if there's any candidates out there that I actually do kind of like, the one that always comes to mind is Mayor Pete Budaj. Okay, now there's a lot of fire that's being tossed in his direction, and I'm talking about from both sides of the spectrum. There's people on the left and people on the right that are coming after him, which is fine. You don't have to agree with everything he says. There's a lot of things I don't agree with him on. I don't really agree with him on a lot of his stances when it comes to the Second Amendment, and there are some things that I don't think that he should really be making empty promises on. But the thing is, though, out of all candidates, I think he's the only one that I've ever actually truly looked at. It's like, you know what? I actually like him. I actually think he would make a great leader. Now, it's fine if you don't like him, okay? And you can have a different perception of me if you want to. That's entirely up to you. I'm not asking anybody to buy into what I believe, and I'm not asking anybody to try to, change my mind, or I'm not asking you, and I'm not out here to try to change anybody's mind. But the thing is, though, when it comes down to politics, okay, the only thing you should ever really be attacking is the policies. Yes, I know I'm very, very critical at times of President Trump, especially like how he conducts himself. And there are times when I'm very critical about him on the personal level. The only reason why I do that is because there are some things that I think that are just way too beyond the pale, and some things that should be left alone, but he can't leave alone himself. Now, the thing is there are some policies that I greatly disagree with him on, but when it comes down to Mayor Pete, however, there are some things that I do agree with him greatly on, but this isn't about his policies right now. This is deliberately about straight hit pieces, about people that have these grotesque, gross opinions about him, right? Now, I'm a firm believer that when it comes down to have an opinion of somebody, right? Everybody around here in this country has the right to believe whoever they want to, has the right to listen or have their own points of view on somebody, which is fine. The only problem is when people start to inflict religion upon it, okay? Now, we live in a country, and people will say, the separation of church and state was not in the Constitution. That's correct, okay? But Thomas Jefferson even talked about how there has to be a wall separating church and state. Now, people will make the argument that the wall separating church and state was to ensure that the church is protected from the state, or the state was protected from the church. It goes both ways. I don't care what anybody says. You're not going to convince me one way or another, okay? The wall is there to protect us, to ensure that we do not become a theocracy, all right? We do not need to become a theocracy in this country, because when religious law starts taking over, that's when problems start to happen. Why? Because then one person will declare that their religion is the most superior. If you don't believe me, look at certain countries all across the world where they believe that their religion is the only religion that should exist there, and you should follow it, or else we're going to burn you at the stake, essentially. Now, I want everybody to understand something. We have seen in history how that is a problem. In history, when religion becomes the law of the land, that's when you start seeing more people, be executed for their slightest infractions, for crimes that they have committed and whatnot. And we see it nowadays, even today in the Middle East. There are certain parts of the Middle East wherever if you commit adultery, you're going to be stoned to death. And we're talking about women. The men tend to get left alone at times, unless the country decides that they want to take it out on them. There are certain parts of the Middle East where if you're a homosexual, you get thrown off of buildings. which is absolutely deplorable and disgusting. There are certain parts of Africa that if you are found to be a homosexual, they will burn you with a rubber tire and they will set it on fire. It's called necklacing. It's usually for the most egregious offenses out there, and there are certain parts across the world where people are executed. There are even in places like in Indonesia and Malaysia where they have Sharia police, where being a homosexual is against the law and you can actually be caned for it. But the thing is, though, these are all horrible things, and to the credit of the administration, they want to make it to where we can get to a point where homosexuality will no longer be criminalized across the planet. It's a really tall order to make because there's a lot of people out there that say they're not ready for that yet, which I get that. I'm not out there to tell a country what they should or should not do. I can just simply tell them I simply disagree with their points of view. It's that simple. Now, a question was posed to me, okay? Why isn't Mayor Pete, why is he so critical about Christians and not so much about, Muslims across the Middle East? Which I said, that's a fair point. I would like to see him be more critical. But the reason why he is so critical is because the people he's talking about are in this country to this day. And I'm not just talking about the Mike Pences of the world. There are people out there that are writing disgusting articles that I find completely repugnant in every way. And the thing is, what's more offensive is the fact that they're throwing God into the mix. I am not the most religious person in the world. However, I do believe in God. I do believe in Jesus. I do believe in some way, shape, or form that we are created by one divine person. And we should follow his example. But the Bible is filled with all kinds of inaccuracies. It's filled with all kinds of, contradictory statements where it says to do one thing while somebody else does something else. It talks a lot about temptation. It talks a lot about incest. It talks about violence. It talks about, striking people down. The Old Testament, the New Testament, the Ten Commandments, whatever you want to put at it, okay? There's a lot of that in the Bible. And the thing is people are too afraid to admit that they cherry pick from the Bible. I'm one of those people that's not afraid to do that. I will tell you, I would much rather follow the examples of the Bible to where you would treat people the way you would want to be treated. To be a humble and a strong, good person of strong moral character. But a lot of the religious people in this country, now I don't want to say a lot of, but there's quite a bit that I see around here that don't follow that example. They're completely hypocritical. I find some of them absolutely horrible, and to say that they are people of God actually shows why people are not attending church anymore. It's because of men like these. So let's go ahead and go into our first example right here, right? This article is from the website Charisma News. Gay Activism, the Death Rattle of a Nation by Bert Farias. This is on Valentine's Day of all days, all right? Now, essentially, he kind of goes off and talking about, and there he goes, he's throwing the Bible, he's talking about, Romans and whatnot. But here's the part that really kind of gets to me, right? He talks about 1 Corinthians and Timothy 1:10. Some translations unfortunately use the word homosexual when there was no Greek word for it. The Bible is canonized way before 1892. The word that is used in the aforementioned references is arsenkoites, and it's just perhaps a male-to-male sexual union behavior. The Bible mentions no other gender besides male and female. There is no gender called homosexual or transgender either. Well, yeah, of course there isn't. But the thing is, though, is like just because it wasn't in the Bible does not mean it wasn't there. I mean, that to me, that's a very weak argument to make. You can't say that that's a real basis of something to kind of go off of. This fact has been lost to millions of people across America and now the world. Even Christians have suddenly allowed homosexual behavior to be elevated to the status of gender in their minds. The LGBTQ movement seeks to elevate their behavior to gender status, but one of their best members, Gordon Vidal, had it right. To paraphrase again, sex is a behavior, not a gender. We see the leftist efforts in the courts and society change that. Moreover, blindly, ignorantly, denominations have altered what the Bible says and yielded to this perversion. It's a lie that Western culture in particular has swallowed. But the truth is, these are men and there are women. The rest is behavior. Churches and clergy who have swallowed the lie of homosexual behavior being elevated to gender status are trophies of hell and Satan's prized possession. That to me is the biggest crock of shit if I've ever seen it, okay? Anybody that tries to invocate saying that this is Satan coming in here, goes to show that they know absolutely nothing about Satanism, okay? Now, I was thinking that Satanism was all about sacrificing goats or doing something absolutely horrible and was promoting, child sex trafficking and things like that. Nothing could be further from the truth, okay? Here, I'm going to give an example as to why. These are the 11 satanic rules of the earth. Do not give opinions of or advice unless you are asked. Do not tell your troubles to others unless you are sure they want to hear them. When in another's lair, show him respect or else do not go there. If a guest in your lair annoys you, treat him cruelly and without mercy. Do not make sexual advances unless you are given the mating signal. Do not take that which does not belong to you unless it is a burden to the other person and he cries out to be relieved. Acknowledge the power of magic if you have employed it successfully to obtain your desires. If you deny the power of magic after having called upon it with success, you will lose all you have obtained. Do not complain about anything to which you need not subject yourself. Do not harm little children. Do not kill non-animal human animals unless you are attacked for your own food. When asked in open territory, bother no one. If someone bothers you, ask him to stop. If he does not stop, destroy him. Okay, you may not always agree with stuff like this, but those are all written in the satanic religion from 1967 when the religion was actually founded, essentially, all right? So to say that this is trophies of hell and Satan's prized possession, it to me is a crock of shit, honestly. And this guy is, all he's doing is he's trying to create clickbait right here to get more followers, essentially. And people that are too stubborn or too ignorant to know the difference between the two, they're just going to flock to these guys that are expressing their First Amendment right opinions. But that's where I'm coming in. I'm going to start holding people like this accountable, because if nobody does, they're just going to continue to spread this hate speech, these horrible articles. The American pulpit is to blame. Preachers who know better are to blame. The constant compromises of preachers to avoid controversy is creating much damage, not only the world, which is looking for a clear sound from preachers, but also to believers who have little discernment or are growing tired of ambiguity. For example, one very influential and popular minister who has millions of followers was asked if homosexuality was wrong, and his general response was we're evolving. Evolving? That's like saying the Bible is evolving. How pathetic of an answer. The Bible has not evolved. The beliefs that come from the Bible, however, have. This is something that this guy does not understand. There was a time where if people were accused of being a witch, they would be burned at the stake. I don't see many people getting burned at the stake anymore. There was a time where people would walk around during the Spanish Inquisition. They were inquisitors. Anytime somebody was accused of not following the faith, all they had to do was say this person is not following the faith, and these people would be tortured relentlessly. You mean to tell me that we're not beyond this point? I would hope to say that we are. Because quite honestly, the fact that you're actually advocating that the Bible has not evolved, nobody's saying that the Bible has evolved, but the way we have evolved is what we're talking about. So this is where he really takes it to another level. In fact, when those who practice such things that are deserving of death, okay? Notice the quotations, deserving of death. Also approve of others who practice them, Romans 1:32. It is one of God's final signs of his wrath on a society. This is a description of gay activism and constantly pushing for its normalcy and marginalizing those who approve. This is present day America. How far we have fallen. So you mean to tell me that we have not fallen when we did Japanese internment camps? You're telling me we did not fall when we enslaved entire races of people? You mean to tell me that we have not fallen far when we did horrible things as a country? And the thing is, I'm not this social justice warrior, but they are picking really weird times to talk about when we have fallen far as a nation. How would this guy know what it means to fall? About morals and values? Where did this guy get this idea? Because he read it out of a book? Does he not possess his own morals and values? Has he not done something and thought for himself at all in his entire life? I'm going to go with probably not. And the reason why I say this is because he is continuing to spit out this rhetoric like it is absolute. There are some laws that say that they're not going to grant these marriages, but to me, those laws are outdated completely, because what happens between two consenting adults should be none of our freaking concern. I am a straight man. I love my wife. Never considered being gay in my entire life. I'm not interested, okay? Men are insane. What can I say? But I love my wife with my heart and soul, and I swore that I would always cherish her, and I keep that promise. I made those vows before God. But that's my life. What goes on between two consenting adults is none of my business. And the fact that there are still laws in this country that actually restrict it to where gays can't get married inside of a church. You know, I'm not saying that churches should be forced to perform the service, but there should be the option for people to say yes or no. But nowadays, it just seems like guys like this guy, Bert, thinks that the answer should always be no because God said so. When millions of Americans applaud Pete Buttigieg and his husband, it is the death rattle of a nation. When the never-Trumpers and Trump haters counteract with judgment and accusations of adultery against our own president in response to Buttigieg's abominable lifestyle, they are grasping for straws in the last gasp of air of a drowning argument. It's not a drowning argument. Adultery is talked about in the Bible, in Proverbs, but a man who commits adultery has no sense. Whoever does so destroys himself. Blows and disgrace are his lot, and his shame shall never be wiped away. Proverbs 6:32-35. I mean, is anybody else like not see what I'm seeing? I mean, look, it's right there in black and white. But guess what it also does talk about? It does talk about homosexuality within the Bible in Leviticus. Now, there are people that are just actively religious that say Leviticus is where it talks about homosexuality is against the Bible. Well, it also talks about shellfish being against, you know, you're not supposed to eat shellfish. But I don't see very many parishioners or many Christian people protesting Red Lobster. Oh, because they'll say in the New Testament, Jesus said it was okay. Okay, hold that thought. But here's where he goes on to say how Trump says that he admits he was never a perfect person. I never said I'm a perfect person, nor pretended to be someone that I'm not. I've said and done things I regret, and the words released today on this more than a decade old video are one of them. Anyone who knows me knows these words don't reflect who I am. I said it. I was wrong. I apologize. I pledge to be a better man tomorrow and will never, ever let you down. That comment was about when he said that he would, if a woman who comes up to a celebrity, he says you can grab them by the pussy and they'll let you do it. All right. Now, I know where he was coming from. There's a lot of people that out there that say much worse things than we do on a daily basis, but this man is now the leader of this country. To me, it's bygones is bygones. We can't keep reflecting upon it. He apologized for it. Fine. Let's keep on going. But in stark contrast, Mayor Pete has talked about how his homosexual relationship to his husband, Jason, has brought him closer to God. He has kissed his partner in public at public rallies. He is pushing his homosexuality, not apologizing for it. Now, would you ask anybody to apologize for who they are? He has nothing to apologize for, and he does not need to apologize to you either, all right? He doesn't need your blessing. He does not need your permission. Nobody does. There's only two laws that need to be made in this country when it comes down to consummation or marriage. No marriage between men or women with children. No adults or children are allowed to be married whatsoever. Minimum age should be 17 across the board, across the entire United States. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But that's with parental consent and obviously not getting married to animals. That's it. All right. You can throw out there that it's against God. Well, there's a lot of things that are against God that we seem to break that rule every freaking day of our lives. How many people have taken the Lord's name in vain? That was supposed to be a big letdown right there. But for some reason, we seem to let some standards slide by. But I guess this is just too bothersome for some people. I guess this is just too hard for some people to kind of really grasp this concept, right? But the thing is, this is just one guy, right? This is just one guy that has an opinion, should I say. I want to say it's a bullshit opinion, but it's his opinion nonetheless, okay? And I'm not coming after this guy because he's a Christian. I'm coming after this guy because he's actually an awful person, I think. I think what he is saying is nothing more than a hit piece. I think he's being nothing more but a child about stuff like this. He's letting his superstition cloud his judgment and his humanity. Budaj and others of his kind will do everything in their power to normalize homosexual relationships, even more in the eyes of America. They are products of the Bible is called a debased mind, or a mind void of judgment that God has given them over to. Wrong, wrong, wrong. This is why we are not a theocracy. If this guy had his way, and if he created this to be a theocracy, we would be in trouble. Don't believe me? Just think about it. Who's seen A Handmaid's Tale? I have. That's exactly what it would be looking like in a theocracy, especially if you followed the Bible to the letter. Another article that I'm going to share is by one of the gentlemen that I was actually talking about, comparing between Donald Trump and Mayor Pete. This article is called, "I Will Say What the Political Leaders Cannot Say About Peter Budaj." Now, I'm not going to paraphrase anything in this. I'm going to read every little bit of this. Now, you can skip ahead of this if you want to, but you've got to hear this guy, every bit of it. "It is certainly politically incorrect to say this. In fact, in the eyes of many, what I'm about to say is a classic example of extreme religious bigotry. But I will say it nonetheless. Choosing an out and proud married gay man to run for president, let alone become president, would contribute to the further degeneration and moral confusion of our society, along with further attacks on our most fundamental rights." First off, there are no fundamental rights that you are in trouble of, okay? If you're going to bring up the fact that there was a gay couple that sued a cake shop, the one in Oregon, well, the reason why they sued was because these people had their information doxed, and they were getting harassed on a day-to-day basis because that shop decided to release their information, and they were getting harassed. Had nothing to do with it. Now, I'm a firm believer that every business has a right to decline service to whoever they see fit. If they decide that they don't want to make a cake for somebody because of their sexual orientation, you shouldn't even have to say it. You should say, "I don't want to serve you." I think it's disgusting. I don't think you should be in business, because if you're in the business of serving people, then that's exactly what you should do. But if you fail, it's because you failed on your own accord. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You've got nobody to blame but yourself for your own prejudices. When I tweeted this statement out on February 8th, it received far more retweets and likes than my average tweet. Far more, so it obviously struck a chord. The support was strong and consistent. Also, as expected, there were no words of condemnation and rebuke, including this tweet from Bible teacher Gilbert Gonzalez, who wrote, "Please tell me this tweet is from a different century. There is no way that anyone today that has any education would ever write something so generally uninformed, childish, and biblically ignorant. This is why people don't take Christianity seriously. Its leaders refuse to learn." Love it, love it, love it. He is absolutely correct. Obviously, I fully expected responses like this. That's why I began my tweet saying, "Call me a homophobic bigot, but I'll say it anyway." What else could I expect? The moment you say a word about Mayor Pete being married to another man, all while flaunting his deep Christian faith, you'll be called a homophobic bigot. No, you're being called a homophobic bigot because you're saying homophobic bigot shit. Now, here's the thing. Homophobia means that you're afraid of gay people. I don't think this guy is afraid of anybody. I don't think he checks underneath his bed or checks inside the closet, no pun intended, for gay people. I just think that he is judgmental in every aspect. He just has deep-seated hatred in his heart towards people that are gay. And the fact that we've got a 38-year-old man who was also a mayor for 8 years in the town of South Bend, Indiana, is running for president. Now, I'm sure he's afraid of a gay man becoming president because he's afraid of the values that this country is going to diminish. But again, our country has done some really horrible things in the day, and I've accepted this. I denounce every bit of it. I mean, for crying out loud, we even injected syphilis into members of the minority community without telling them what we were doing to them. But yet there was no fire and brimstone for that. Why is that? Can anybody tell me why that is? But yet we're worried about a gay man becoming president of the United States. So be it. I've been called worse things than that. Come to think of it, Jesus himself, our perfect Savior, was called far worse things. Don't you dare compare yourself to Jesus. You are not him. Jesus was actually attacked, beaten, and had to carry a cross through the streets while he's being pummeled with rocks and rotten food all the way up until he got to the hill. You are not him. You've not sacrificed nearly as much as Jesus, and I would really wish you would stop dropping Jesus and comparing yourself to him. You're not him, sir. I'm sorry. And he told us to expect the same. It is enough for the disciple that he be like his teacher and the servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they call this of the household? Matt 10:25. According to the Professor Randall Rouser, however, to call me a homophobic bigot is not out of line. As he wrote in his blog, behavior and reasoning like this provide very plausible evidence that Christians like Brown have an irrational fear of and or antipathy toward gay people. Indeed, according to Professor Rouser, evangelicals like Brown fall over themselves to excuse Trump's grotesque immorality. Among his latest egregious actions last week, he mocked the words of Jesus at the National Prayer Breakfast while evangelical pastors laughed in the audience. But that's where Professor Rouser missed the point, as do Gilbert Gonzalez and other critics. First, I have never excused this president's past immorality. In fact, I probably called for attention as much as any evangelical leader during the primaries. To say I fall over myself to excuse Trump's grotesque immorality is to speak a lie. Second, to this day, like a broken record, I draw attention to aspects of the president's behavior that I find destructive and harmful. In fact, shortly after the National Prayer Breakfast, I wrote an article addressing the very issues Professor Rouser mentioned regarding Trump's response to the word of Jesus. So to brand me hypocritical for speaking out against Mayor Pete's proud homosexuality is to be either misinformed, dishonest, or both. But there's a much bigger issue that the critics are missing. Trump is not flaunting his past immorality, nor is he pushing it presently. Instead, when the ugly tape of his lewd comments went public, he said, "I've never said it in person." All right, I already read that part, okay? In contrast, Mayor Pete has talked about how his homosexuality relationship to his husband, Chasen, has brought him closer to God. He has kissed his partner at public rallies. He is pushing his homosexuality, not apologizing for it. You better believe he will do everything in his power to normalize homosexual relationships, even more in the eyes of America. He will also do so to best to marginalize those who are convinced that these relationships are contrary to the will of God. Mayor Pete has never said anything likewise, okay? He understands that there are people out there that feel a certain way towards homosexuality, all right? He's made that abundantly clear. He's not out there to destroy anybody or their beliefs. He is one man who is a Christian who happens to be gay. But he is so much more than that. Now, I don't know everything about Mayor Pete, but everything that I've seen about him, I like and I respect about him. There is a lot of things that he's done that are good, and he acts like a decent human being, which I think decency is something that we are lacking in this country, honestly. There's a lot of indecent people, and this gentleman here is one of them. It's not so much that homosexual practice is worse than adultery or fornication. Rather, it is the fact that there is an aggressive gay agenda that has systemically undermined biblical morals for decades. It has also sought to silence all dissenting voices, becoming the principal threat to our religious and moral freedoms. That's why I've been acting and resisting LGBT activism since 2004, reaching out to individuals with compassion, but resisting the agenda with courage. And so, it is not the people whom I oppose. God forbid I've made that clear hundreds, if not thousands of times. It is not even homosexual acts, which primarily concern me, although issues of health and safety should not be ignored. It is an aggressive agenda that I oppose, one that I should have tracked carefully for many years. It is an agenda that would only be fueled with great intensity by an out and proud gay president. And so, just as President Obama's administration pushed radical trans activism on our nation's schools under severe penalties, things could only intensify under a president who would flaunt his husband being the country's first gentleman. In the end, this has nothing to do with the fact having an irrational fear and or antipathy towards gay people. How is it that Christian leaders end up repeating the world's talking points? Instead, it has everything to do with the recognizing where gay activism has taken us in the last 50 plus years and recognizing where it takes us next. I, for one, will continue to sound the alarm in advance. Things are confusing enough already. We don't need to make things any worse. Calling me a homophobic bigot will only deal with the real issues at hand. We avoid them in our own demise. Well, let's get something straight here, okay? It's going to happen whether you like it or not. Gay people are who they are because who knows? It's none of my freaking business, and it's none of your business either. But the fact that you keep jumping, throwing God down here, to me just shows that you are incapable of individual thought right here, okay? I don't consider you a homophobic bigot. I just consider you a terrible human being, actually. Now, I probably should be better about this, and I probably shouldn't get so animated about this, but you've got people that are going to flock to you for guidance. People are going to turn to you and ask, how am I supposed to explain this to my children? Well, let's make it easy for you. They're your children. Figure it out. But the thing is, he talks about how we are losing our morals and our values. I agree. We are losing morals and values. Gay people are not the cause of it. Trans people are not the cause of it. Granted, there are some trans people out there, or people that are pretending to be trans, that are taking advantage of the situation to benefit themselves and themselves alone. There are a lot of activists out there that denounce those activities. There's a Jessica Yanni that was just recently arrested for harassing people and even for having tasers and whatnot. This person is a minority out of many, all right? Now, I'm not exactly an LGBT spokesperson. I'm just someone that looks at stories from both sides of the spectrum because there's more than one side to the story. This guy, I can tell, hasn't checked any other side but the side that he is on itself. That's blatantly obvious, okay? That is blatantly obvious. But he talks about how we're losing the values in this country. Yes. You want me to know how I know he's correct? These are Bible verses about loving thy neighbor. 1 John 1 John 4:20-21. If a man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he hath seen, how can he love God whom he hath not seen? He brought up Romans 13:10. Love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the unfulfilled law. Leviticus, thou shalt not defraud thy neighbor, nor neither rob him. The wages of him that is hired shall not abide with thee all night until the morning. Leviticus, thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. Those are all examples of what it means to truly love your neighbor as you would love yourself. But the problem is he is cherry picking to fit his own agenda. I'm doing it as well. I admit that. But I am open to admitting that there are certain parts of the Bible that we would not allow today. Why? Because we are a memorial society and we have to build ourselves up to higher. There are certain religions of the world that need to do a little bit of catching up and treat people a little bit more equally. They need to get rid of, treating people like second-class citizens just because of their gender or because of their sexual orientation. We need to get past all that. Treating people just because they are not exactly your kind of people is exactly the reason why we had segregation for the longest time. Not every case where members of the LGBT community are out there to influence your children. There are people out there that are trying to do that, and that is wrong. The only people that should be having these kinds of conversations are the parents. If the parents are bigots, then guess what? They need to learn on their own accord. You can't force this stuff down people's throats, though. But people have got to get a grip and stop acting so damn childish. And one of the worst ones about that, right? Now, I'm not going to beat this guy down too much. As much as I want to. As much as I want to. Rush Limbaugh recently said after his return to a show after receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom, Democrats are sitting there and looking at Mayor Pete, a 37-year-old gay guy. Limbaugh told his radio listeners while discussing what he perceives as a weak Democratic field. And they're saying, okay, how's this going to look? A 37-year-old gay guy kissing his husband on stage next to Mr. Man Donald Trump. What's going to happen there? Limbaugh said Democrats must be thinking, despite all the great progress and despite all the great wokeness and despite all the great ground that's been covered, Americans likely still aren't ready to elect an openly gay man. I wonder why that is. I think it's because of people like Rush Limbaugh. Here's the thing. Rush Limbaugh is a mouthpiece. That's it. All right? And he's been very successful in his career for a very long time. But he is nothing more but a hit piece. He's made fun of people for having Parkinson's. He's made fun of people for being homosexuals. And he's even made some very derogatory comments. And even though there are those that say, well, his producer is black, he obviously can't be racist. Okay, fine. You can make that argument. But the reason why we are still living at a time like this where people are not ready for a gay president is because that's all you're focused upon. America also said they weren't ready for a businessman president. Yet here's President Trump. People said they weren't ready for a black president. We had President Obama. When is it going to be time? Is it never going to be time? Are you ever going to get past your own personal biases? And are you just too scared to admit that you have a personal problem and it's not because of you're losing your morals or values? If you let one person change your morals or values, if you think one person has that much power over you, then I've got nothing for you. If you feel so strongly about it, fine. But I'm just going to disagree with you across the board. I look at Mayor Pete as a man with flaws. That's just who he is. He is proud of who he is. And I say more power to you. I think it's great. I have no problem, especially if I have somebody called the first gentleman, especially if it's Chasen Budaj. He's a school teacher. There's nothing wrong with that. He's probably had some rough times in his life. He could probably relate to the common person. There's no issue with this. But if that's your only issue, then you're the one with the problem, not Mayor Pete or not his husband. You are entitled to your own opinion. Let's put it that way. But we are so scared of things we do not understand. That's the problem with people. They are scared of things they do not truly understand, nor do they take the time to learn. Why? Because it's so much easier for somebody to tell them what their point of view is. But the funny part is Rush Limbaugh has the audacity to talk about, what we're looking at and morals and values, how he is the epicenter of morals and values. How many successful marriages had Rush Limbaugh had? Let's think about that. Didn't he commit adultery a couple times? Yes. But he is not the person to look to for morality, for spirituality, for guidance. Again, I'm not going to try to beat up too much on the guy because, Mayor Pete already came out and says, I'm not going to get taught about family values by Rush Limbaugh. But there are a lot of people. These are not the only ones out there. There are plenty of people out there with this mentality. So you ask me again, why isn't Mayor Pete more critical of the Islamic world when they toss gay people off of buildings? The answer is simple. Because the people that are talking about him are in this country. And they're saying disgusting, disparaging things. Now, granted, words, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Well, people listen to this. People hear you and take you at your word. Especially the people that listen to Rush Limbaugh. Especially the people that listen and read the filth that those two gentlemen wrote on that article. Now, I don't care if anybody comes after me. That's fine. You can come after me. I don't give a shit. I'm 36, almost 37 years old. I'm a man, okay? I have no problem dealing with the trolls. I've had death threats before, okay? I'm not worried about some troll that I'm probably never going to meet ever again in my entire life. But it's quite simple, though. If you think that your values or your morals are threatened by Mayor Pete and his husband, then what are your morals or values? When did your morals and values start and when did they end? When did this outrage start? Have you always felt this way? Do you follow the Bible to the absolute letter? Or do you only pick and choose like everybody else does? Be honest with yourself. That's the biggest thing. In closing, it's time for us all to wake up. If you have a problem with Mayor Pete because he's gay, that's entirely up to you. I don't just look at Mayor Pete because he's gay. I look at him because he's a man that's running for office who just happens to be gay. That's it. I think he's a good man. He's got some good ideas. I'm all about the ideas. And people can criticize me all they want to. I really don't care. I speak for myself and myself alone. That's all there is to it. You're entitled to your opinion just like I am. We might disagree, but that's the way things are in this country. The ability to agree to disagree and carry on with our lives. But I just had to get my points of view out here because it's time for somebody to hold those guys accountable to their words. Because if nobody else is going to do it, damn it, I will. Anyway, hopefully everybody has enjoyed the rest of their weekend. We are rounds complete.